Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And you be the judge. I'm Dr. Paul Dyer, and my two lovely co-hosts, Marilyn Pierre and Judge Claudia Barbara. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us every Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m. to share your time and your spirits and all the things you're doing and going through. I do want to apologize for not being on camera. I don't state this publicly, but I have had a tragic loss on New Year's Eve, and it is taking a toll on me. But I know that this is important to me. It's important to Marilyn. It's important to Judge Claudia Barber that we continue this important podcast show to let everyone know that we are constantly working for the betterment of community, relationships, and on the global world. So I just want to say it's very important that you guys are here, and thank you, Marilyn, for being such a strong partner and supportive of everything that we have done and will continue to do. So thanks, Marilyn, for holding down the farm right now.
Well, you are welcome, and I just feel so bad for your loss, and I don't know if you want to share it with everyone.
So my service dog, who did a lot for me, service animal, me being a vet, it was more than just a pet, but he was killed on New Year's Eve.
Oh.
And so it's just been it's been a thing. So, so that's what's going on with me. But so there's a lot of other things tied up in that too. So, thanks. Marilyn knows Addie very well, and Addie loves to go to different parades and things like that. So,
yeah, Addie was really a really nice, beautiful, interesting dog, and and like you said, he wasn't just a dog; he was a friend. I remember seeing lots of pictures of you and Addie and videos with Addie accompanying you on your walks and you talking about how much Addie means to you. So I am really profoundly sorry for your loss. And if there's anything that we could do to help, please let me know. And I don't know if you could read the chats, but people are putting their condolences in the chat for you.
No, I'm not going to read the chat. But again, that's why here's the thing, when we go through things as a person, we go through things as a community. And so when we talk about rights, human rights, civil rights, living rights, all those things, it's very emotional to why we do what we do. And it's not just, it doesn't just affect one, it affects the many. And I think when people realize the work that we must do, continue to do, to affect the many with the work we do individually, and realize how important it is that we continue to. This is not a fight. This is a passion of love for community and people and humanity, and I think if the collective understood that, they would realize that we're not just barking at the moon because something is wrong, but it's wrong for so many people. Yes. And it's not, and I think that is not understood. So I think that's why this show is so important. That's why I really love this show and the other shows we do. So thank you.
Well, thank you, because you have been a steadfast partner as well. And it was your great idea to start doing this. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy talking to people. So you give me the opportunity to expand myself as well. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We see that our special guest is here, Mr. Larry Rubin. And if you guys give me an opportunity, I will read Mr. Rubin's bio, because it is so interesting. So let me go ahead and read the bio. Larry Rubin was a student nonviolent coordinating committee, or SNCC. We've heard of SNCC. He was a SNCC organizer between 1961 and 1965. First in Southwest Georgia, and then in Northern Mississippi, working in support of African Americans who were risking their lives to attempt to register to vote. He helped organize Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party precincts, helped Black tenant farmers exercise their rights, and helped Black and white workers gain the right to vote for a union. For 45 years, Mr. Rubin worked in the labor movement as an organizer, speechwriter, editor, and political advocate. He was also a reporter for the Dayton Daily News, a speechwriter for the U.S. Department of Education, and served 4 terms on the Tacoma Park, Maryland City Council. As a staff member of the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council, he focused on African American/Jewish relations and did the same for the Philadelphia Urban Coalition. Mr. Rubin has been an advisor to and active in DC Operation Understanding, building bridges in Philadelphia, and other groups in DC and Baltimore building bridges between the Black and Jewish communities. For over 60 years, Mr. Rubin volunteered to work with various projects with Russ College and HBCU in Holly Springs, Mississippi. In 2021, he moved back to Holly Springs as a community organizer. Mr. Rubin is an officer of the SNCC Legacy Project and of Mosaic Visions, which works to help empower Jews. Let me start over again. He is an officer of the SNCC Legacy Project and of Mosaic Visions, which works to help empower Jews of color, a fast-growing demographic within the Jewish community. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Larry Rubin. Yay! Mr. Rubin, you are on mute.
First of all, I want to add my condolences to those of others. I understand what it's like to lose a beloved member of the family, and pets are just that. I understand what that does to you. And I want to thank Marilyn and Mike Tabor for inviting me today. I understand that mostly you speak about local Montgomery County issues. Today, because I lived in Montgomery County for over 30 years before moving back to Mississippi, I think I can say that I hope that tonight's discussion will help the local discussion, maybe give some background information to it. I'm familiar with the issues in Montgomery County, the cemetery issue, other issues. I'm also very aware of the rising anti-Semitic attacks that are happening now. Although my impression is that the rising anti-Semitic attacks are not from the Black community. It's all a piece. When I say attacks, I'm talking about scrolling on the, I forget which high school it was recently, Jews aren't welcome, things like that. In any case, let me begin my story. I want to try to adjust this a little bit. Where you see, oh, okay, I give up. I guess I look the way I look.
No, you look terrific. Don't you think so, Susan? Yeah, see, Susan is saying yes, she thinks so, and so is Sandra. Yeah. Holly, Martha, you guys want to get in on it?
All I see is this old guy. And I mean, I'm about 18 years old. So, I mean, I don't know who that guy is. But anyway, what I plan to do is talk to for about 10 minutes and then shut up. And then let's have a discussion. When dealing with Black-Jewish relations in general, first of all, it's important to understand that we're talking about communities. we're not talking about organized groups. There are organizations within these communities, Black communities and Jewish communities, but it's excuse me, it's hard to make generalization. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I learned in college was that all generalizations are false. I have to think about that.
Including that one?
Well, that's the point. Thank you. Jews and Blacks in this country, let me start where I left off. It's important to realize, too, that within the Jewish community, there are several major divisions. And again, it's hard to generalize, but the first wave of Jews came to this country really during the founding of the country. And they were quite assimilated from Portugal and Spain, but they had been kicked out of those countries and went to Holland and others. And they came here as part of the colonization of Indian territory by Europeans. The second generation, the second wave, was starting about the 1830s, and they were generally German Jews, who themselves were very assimilated, came to this country really to make money. And a lot of them settled in the South because that's where business opportunities were. But by far, the largest wave of Jewish immigrants, through which I would say 90% of American Jews are descended from, including myself, came in starting in the 1870s, 1880s perhaps, and ending in 1921, when laws were passed against immigration from Eastern Europe. And these were Jews who were very, very poor. I mean, they were what they called serfs of the treasury in the old country. And when they came to this country, they came to save their lives. They didn't come for religious freedom. Most, as a matter of fact, just the opposite. Many of them believed that they couldn't really practice their religion outside of their own little shtetls, but they had to leave to save their lives because the Tsar was killing them. So they came to this country and moved to New York and to big cities because that's where jobs were. And they met a new immigrant wave from the South, who were largely African Americans, who were coming to these to the big northern cities for the same reason, really to save their lives. This was the end of Reconstruction. This was the beginning of the Ku Klux Klan. This was the beginning of tremendous oppression in the South. And this was the Great Migration, Great Northern Migration. Heat of Other Suns and such, which there are a lot of books about. And the two groups met in New York and other cities. And I wonder that what they made of each other. I mean, Jews came and they couldn't speak English. Most of them were illiterate, actually, even in their native language, which was Yiddish. And Blacks ran into this group that looked white, but didn't consider themselves white. You ask any of them, what are you? They would say, we're Jewish. And from the point of view of the Jewish community, they saw the Black community and maybe they couldn't understand what they were saying, but they did understand one thing, that they were Goyim, just like everybody else. There was different kinds of Goyim. There was Italians, and there was Blacks, and there was Irish, and there was Slovaks, and several others. And then there was us. We were just different. But to most Jews, Blacks were not all that different from the Irish or anybody else. They were Americans that were not Jewish. And that was the vast majority. But something else was happening too. A lot of the Jews that came from the 1880s and up until the 1920s, and increasingly large numbers as the years went on, had learned a lesson in the old country that Jews had no rights, they were starving, and they could not advance alone. They were too small and too powerless. And they needed to join with others. And in the old country, they did, and a disproportionate number became socialists and communists and anarchists, because this is what was happening, and these were the groups that they joined. And among blacks, around the same time as that we're talking about, which is the early 1900s, blacks were organizing politically. Blacks had always been organized and had always been fighting from 1619 on. But in terms of building political power, this was more or less the beginning of it. And the two groups recognized each other, and Jews recognized that they, as Jews, could not advance without allies. And the best ally they had to change the nation, become more progressive, was the black community. And they realized that as the black community had made progress, the rest of the country had made progress. So Jews helped form the NAACP. They helped form other black organizations. And there was what you might call a black Jewish coalition starting to be built in the 19 teens and 1920s. And it found probably its best expression within the labor movement, where unions across the country were organizing on a integrated basis, and particularly in the South. The steelworkers organized unions, locals, black and white together, and Jews were very much involved in that. The only thing is that neither Jews nor the other white elements within these movements quite understood where blacks were coming from, the burdens that blacks had. A lot of Jewish people sort of overemphasized the similarity. Jews, after all, were white. Now, we didn't consider ourselves white. If you ask any Jewish person, when I was growing up in the 1950s, and I grew up in a very poor Jewish community. I didn't realize we were poor, but I grew up in the slums of Philadelphia. What are you? You would say Jewish. Well, aren't you white? Well, we said, yeah, we're white. But we really would not understand the import of that question. We really wouldn't understand, what that meant, really, in the greater American picture. That was then. Now, I want to quickly jump into fast forward, and then I want to jump back again to my own experience. Fast forward. Today, things are a little bit different. The Jewish community has been able to, by and large, I don't know what the term is. In America, I guess you would say, work your way up from the poor, working class communities to, by and large, today, the Jewish community are rather affluent as a group. And a lot have lost their roots. A lot have become white, have assimilated, in other words. But there is a movement back to Jewish roots and a movement back to Jewish values. We'll get back to that later. In any case, so there I was growing up in Philadelphia and in a left-wing Jewish community of poor workers. My mother was a hairdresser. My father was a welder. We were very poor, and I'm proud to say that I have maintained the family tradition, even to today. And so when the civil rights movement in the South came up, A lot of us didn't think twice. I mean, part of the Jewish culture, part of the Jewish tradition that our grandparents brought from the old country was Jews are people that fight for social justice for ourselves and others. This was just part of our DNA. And it wasn't a religious thing, although it is a religious thing, in fact, called Tikkun Olam, repair the world, part of the Jewish religion. But for most of us, it was a cultural thing, an ethnic thing. We didn't think of it in terms of religious thing. To be a bench, you had to fight for social justice. Our parents were, many of our parents were blacklisted by McCarthy. We grew up thinking of ourselves as outsiders. Outsiders, first, because we were Jewish, and I mean, our grandparents didn't speak English. I hardly thought of myself as an American. I just got here. My grandparents just landed, so to speak. There was the tradition of fighting for social justice. There was, in the 50s, we were just learning the full scope of the Holocaust. And we were just learning what tremendous danger we were still in as Jews. And we recognized that Black people were faced with that same danger in the 50s because all the gains that had been made during the New Deal were being lost because of voter suppression laws. And the government was being run by these Southern racist sons of bitches that became the chair of every congressional committee. And they were undoing everything that my parents were fighting for, our parents were fighting. And one of the reasons they were able to do this was because their constituents, in many cases, the majority of them, could not vote. So we figured that if we helped the voter registration movement, Black people would vote out of office these right-wing bastards and would help all of us. So we went south. And it was on that basis. I always tell the story. If you ask the average white person that went south to work for SNCC, why did they go south? Most of them would say something like, we were taught in grade school that America was a land of the free and a home of the brave and everybody was equal. And then we saw on television Bull Connor turning fire hoses on Blacks that were just trying to register to vote. And so we went south and tried, and we were shocked. We were shocked at this. So we went south to try to make the American ideal real. Well, I was not shocked by those sites, and neither were really most of the Jewish volunteers. We might have even said something like that if they asked. If we didn't have the words that I'm now using, we didn't have the full self-understanding. But I didn't go because I was shocked that America was not living up to its ideal. I knew capitalism sucked, and I knew that America had never lived up to its ideal, and that's just what America was. And it was just like in Russia. And having recognized that, our goal was to fight, to change it, to change the country, ideal or not. Maybe it wasn't the American ideal didn't care. We wanted a better country. So I went south. And I first went south working for Southwest Georgia Project, which at that time, 1962, was the only project in SNCC that would allow whites to work. Because it was very dangerous, Blacks and whites working together. And you put each other, you put your life on the line, walking down the street, Black and whites together. But when I went to Southwest Georgia, I had never met a non-progressive Jewish person. And I asked Charles Sherrod, who was the director of the press, I said, have you engaged the synagogue down here? He said, no. I said, well, okay, drive me over to the synagogue. I'll get them to help. So he said, I'll drive you over, but I'll wait outside. I said, you don't have to do that. I'll just go in, you know. But he drove me over Friday night services, and he did wait outside. And I went to services, and after the services, you had Roneg Shabbat. Everybody shares a snack. And I went up to, oh no, somebody came over to me. He said, what was I doing here? And so I explained what I was doing here. I came down to work for Charles Sherrod, voter registration, and so forth and so forth. And the guy who happened to be the shamus of the synagogue, the guy that takes care of the grounds, name of Stonewall Cohen. I thought it was, he didn't think it was funny. I smiled, no, Stonewall Cohen. And he says, well, you better get out of the synagogue now. He said, and he said some things that were repeated to me over and over again by Southern Jews, all of whom were this earlier group from Germany that came south, to make money, had actually prospered. The typical thing was that the only dry goods store in the town was owned by Jews, who a lot of the whites, by the way, thought were closer to Jesus than them because they were Jews. They must know all about Jesus. But this is their cousin, right? So tell us. Anyway, what he said was, he said, first of all, if it wasn't for the blacks, it would be us. Jews were afraid. And if it wasn't for the blacks, it would be us. So better it should be the blacks. And number two, we've always gotten along by staying under the radar, just being quiet, being silent. And we're afraid you people coming down would as Jews would turn the spotlight on. Somebody just put in the chat, what is SNCC? I think they misheard me, and I'm saying SNCC. SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's what I was working for. Hope that answers your question. I'm not sure that I interpreted it. In any case, that was my first lesson about being Jewish in the South. The second lesson was this. We lived with a very brave lady. We, being myself and two other SNCC organizers, we lived in the rural area around Albany, Georgia. Her name was Dolly Rain. Everybody called her Mama Dolly. Very brave for taking us in. And by the way, she and like most of the local people that we worked with allowed us to be nonviolent on account of they had shotguns at their door. Anybody came up to their door was met with that shotgun. You could sit in the back room and be nonviolent. They protected us. And I noticed very early that the black people that I was working with responded to me like I was just another white person. Yasser, Mr. Larry, and I would go and I learned early on that part of my job was to be white and show both the white communities and the black communities that whites were not in charge. The blacks were. These were whites. We were working for a black organization. So we would go to homes, knock on doors to talk about voter registration. I didn't say anything. I let my black SNCC colleagues do the talking. to show that they were in charge, and I was just standing there. But that didn't quite work either. Black folks would look at me. And at first, I tried to explain, as I tried to explain to Mama Dollar, who I was living with, that I wasn't white the way they were used to thinking of whites. I just didn't come from that. You know, it was uncomfortable for me to be called sir and all that. But it just didn't work. People just didn't understand. They thought I was trying to, I don't know, get out of something, not feel guilty about something. There was no room within the civil rights movement at that time to discuss Jewishness and how we were different. I just gave up. And for 5 years, I just didn't talk about it. I was just another white guy doing the best I could within the black movement. There was literally no room to talk about being Jewish. And if you did, it was diversionary anyway, because part of what we were trying to do was build black self-empowerment. And that meant building, helping black people feel self-empowered and overcoming 400 years of brainwash. Most black people just automatically, for example, stepped off the sidewalk if the black person was walking in their direction, because that's what they were trained to do. They did it automatically, or bow their heads, or scratch their head, you know. And we were working against that. So in a way, having, you know, a white person in their midst, well, first of all, maybe they didn't feel they had to do that with help, but it just didn't work for a white person to say to them, don't do this. Because they might say, okay, I won't, but that's because you're white. You asked me not to. It just didn't work. And that's one of the things that led SNCC in the end to say, you know, whites need to organize whites because that's where the problem is in the white community, and blacks need to organize blacks. Black self-empowerment. When I first, and this will be the last point that I'll make. No, I'm lying. There's a couple other points I want. When I first started to work for SNCC, the general ideal of the nation, you know, the progressive ideal was America is a melting pot. Everybody has rights because they're American. We're all a melting pot. We all can become Americans. But everybody knew what that meant was white. If you closed your eyes, white or black or anybody, even the Irish, close your eyes, they would see, picture an American, they would see Ozzie and Harriet. That was America. Nobody saw a black person as American. What we were saying is everybody had the right to melt to become white. Well, it turned out, you know, black people didn't want to melt. They didn't have, there was not in the general vocabulary words for that. Now, there always were words for that. There always was the Nation of Islam and Garveyites who recognized what I'm saying. But as the general rule, there was no alternative to we're fighting for our rights because we're American. Until black power was enunciated. We're proud to say that came from SNCC, Stokely Carmichael. And I was there during that period. So SNCC helped push the American ideal from being a melting pot to we are black Americans. We're not going to melt. We're black. And we want power as black Americans. We help push the ideal of America from the melting pot to diversity. We don't all have to be alike. We're all different, you know, but we all have the same rights as difference. That led a lot of Jews who were in the movement to, well, three different reactions. One, were Jews actually that recognized that, they're right. This was also at the time when Black Roots phenomenon happened, the TV show. So a lot of Jews said, well, come on, they're right. We're Jews. What are we doing here? We got to find our own roots. And so there was a Jewish roots movement. Then there were Jews that, and none of these three were necessarily opposed to each other. And within a lot of people, all three happened, or two of them happened, or just one of them happened. Then there was Jews that just felt hurt. We've been putting out our best. We've been risking our lives, and now Black people are kicking us out of the movement. They didn't understand that the movement was against racism, and that racism was in the white community. Maybe that's where whites should be working. I was a little naive too, because what's somebody like me, a Jewish kid from South Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, want to say to a white person in the South, from Appalachia. For one thing, I couldn't understand what they were saying. They couldn't understand me. So there was no white community, exactly. But there were whites to work with. And in fact, for a while, I did go to work with an anti-racist group working in Philadelphia among Jews. Then the other third, and this is within me more, I think, than the others. Although I'm going to digress before I get to that third. I am going to say this. I was arrested once in Belzoni, Mississippi. I was arrested a lot and beaten up a lot. But in Belzoni, I was arrested on suspicion of stealing the shirt that I was wearing. We were never arrested for voter rights. We were always arrested on these any things. And, a shirt like that was stolen from the haberdashery last night. Looks like, show us the sales tag. Oh, you don't have to. So you're under arrest for suspicion of stealing that shirt. And that's exactly what happened in Belzoni. But I was investigated. Investigators from the State Sovereignty Commission came and sat me in a room with the deputies that were slapping their wrists like that, trying to scare me. I don't know why I had been in the South for 5 years. I don't know why them slapping their own wrists could scare me. But in any case, they did say something that did scare me. They said, we haven't killed us a heave in a while, so we're going to take you out. Well, that really started to gel some things that I've been thinking about in my own mind. First of all, how did they know I was Jewish? Something about me, they could tell I was Jewish. They were using, anti-Semitic fear. And I swore to myself, if I ever got out of that, when I go back to college, I would study my own history, Eastern European Jewish history, which is what I did. Figure out what about me leads me to in the movement without even thinking about it. Anyway, back to that 1/3. Were largely people like me who were convinced all along that the most powerful force of progressive change in this country has always been the Black community, and that it was our role to be allies in that Black community. And to quote Ella Baker, do what the people say do, and start where the people are at. And the Black community, the most advanced part of the Black community at that point, was into Black power, Black self-empowerment. And so I decided I'm going to become an ally of that. And that's one of the reasons that I moved back here to Holly Springs, Mississippi, last year. And I am working in several organizations for several movements, Black self-empowerment here in Mississippi. And now I am going to say one more thing before I shut up, because I'm looking at Marilyn and she asked me to tell the story. I am also very active, as Marilyn mentioned, in a group called Mosaic Visions, which is a group that works with Jews of color. There's a a very powerful leader of this movement in Montgomery County, Michael Twitty. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's a famous chef. He writes books of slave meals and enslaved people presented. And he comes down to Holly Springs quite often. He's from Silver Spring. And he's Jewish and he's gay. And he just put out a book called Kosher Soul. And he talks about how, as a black Jew, and he's not very orthodox, he's still religious, the issues that he faces within the Jewish community. So I'm active in that group. One of the fastest growing demographics within the Jewish community today are Jews of color, African Americans converting. One member of that group happens to be my daughter, who actually didn't convert because I forced her. She didn't know. She was 2 years old and she's African American, doesn't being Jewish. But the story I want to say is the first chair of SNCC was Chuck McDew, Charles McDew, first full-time chair, African American from Minneapolis. And he was Jewish. And he always said that he was black by birth, a Jew by choice, and a revolutionary by necessity. And he always told the story that the reason he converted to being Jewish was because when he first came into the movement, the leadership of the black faith community, which was and is the most important organized part of the African American community, always has. Most were very hostile to civil rights. They wouldn't let them have meetings in their churches. But Jews, mostly from the North, he's talking about, were very active in the civil rights movement, working with Martin Luther King. And so he converted to Judaism. Now I will shut up. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you
that
for
was.
indulging.
Oh, sorry, I apologize for interrupting, but that was very interesting. So that's why I think everybody was quiet, because we were hanging on to your every word.
Yeah, I'm used to Jewish groups where you just interrupt.
Well, Holly had a very interesting question, and I thought we could start off with her question, because Holly, do you want to ask your question? Holly? If Holly is not willing to ask her question, I will read it.
You're muted, Holly. You're muted.
I tried to get it. It's in the chat, but basically, it's embarrassing that I would ask this question because I don't know. But were there any Jews among the founding fathers?
Yeah, wasn't the treasurer Judah Benjamin?
That was the Confederacy.
That's the Confederacy. But you're right. There was a guy, time something, that I'm going to look this up.
But it's funny because we think of the founding fathers as being incredibly waspy and incredibly wealthy. So why did they come here if not to improve their lot? You know?
Why did the founding fathers come here?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I mean,
Actually, I've been doing some study of that very question. And they were British. Their ancestors were part of the British aristocracy that came here to steal land from the Indians and to become super wealthy. And they were given charters by the kings of England to do this. They represented the British Empire when they first came. And the fact is that one of the things that pissed off, our founding fathers was they considered themselves as British as anybody else, but they were not allowed to become super millionaires that British people, British whites in Britain were becoming. In fact, it's all summed up in their slogan, taxation without representation. The only people being taxed were rich white people in this country. The average person in this country didn't even notice they were being taxed. They paid 1 shilling a year in taxation. British people pay 26 shillings a year. People being taxed were these rich guys. So they just wanted to become more rich. Also because the British were phasing out slavery. And they needed slavery, to continue in this country. And the British were making signs of being treaties with Indians. And whites in this country just wanted to slaughter the Indians. And by the way, what I'm saying is not actually speculation. If you read the Declaration of Independence, read the lists of complaints, specific complaints against Britain. The British king did this and he did that. What I'm saying is in there very explicitly.
Yeah, and I think Susan might want to add something to that as well.
I was something different. Tell me, should I go ahead?
Yeah, you were talking about taxation, I thought. Go ahead.
Me?
Yes.
No, it's entirely different subject.
Oh, then go ahead. You have the floor.
First of all, I want to say hi to Larry. I just realized that I know you and haven't seen you for years. Sue Hochstetter.
Hello, yes.
How
you been?
Good, thank you. Very good. I'll get your email address and get back with you. I'm going to. So I'm new to this group, so it's a pleasure to be here. Everybody, Mike is a part of my Jewish group and I've been doing work on combating anti-Semitism, and I'm going to be speaking to a group that's mostly Black at DC. And I'd like, Larry, if it's okay, it was a wonderful history you gave. I'd like to use some of what you talked about. Okay. Would you send me your email?
Sure.
Thanks.
Although, wouldn't I be in the list that was sent to everybody?
Oh, we send it blind copy. I could send it to you. I'll put it in the chat for you, Susan. And I misspoke, Susan. Thank you for that. It's nice to know that it's such a small world. I've looked back at the chat, and it was Sandra who wanted to discuss the tax issue. Sandra?
Yeah, there are a couple of factors here. The founding fathers, as I said, were born in the colonies, and most of them were second or third generations born in the colonies. And basically, they were revolting against the British imposing taxes on them. But also, remember when they started, the Constitution, in order to be a citizen, you had to be 21, white, and a landowner. And that didn't change until quite a bit after that. So, and of course, women didn't get the right to vote until 1920. And then, of course, African Americans got the full vote with Johnson's Voting Act in 1964. But it's a very complicated. I was a member of CORE, by the way, Congress of Racial Equality in Syracuse, New York. And yeah. And I did not go south for a variety of reasons. I was chair of the CORE Housing Committee, and we integrated housing in Syracuse and other areas in the state of New York. But aside from that, the whole subject is very complicated. And getting into, of course, slavery was a whole economic issue. And so I think there's some distinctions between being Jewish and being Black. First of all, if you were Jewish, you could pass. And most of you know what I mean by that. My family passed. They were Jewish, and they changed their name in the 1930s to be integrated. And this was in New York City. They were part of what Larry said. My family were socialists. And my dad worked in the garment industry and was one of the founders of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. So I'm aware of it. But I had African American kids in my classes in New York City, so it was not an unusual thing. But there is a difference because if you're Black, it's hard to pass, although many did pass who were very light-skinned. But there were different restrictions, and I don't think we can forget the economic implications, particularly of slavery. It was really an economic institution. Cotton was king, remember, in the South. And it affected the North as well. You all know about that. So, at any rate, I won't go on and on with it, but it is a very complicated thing to explain. And of course, when I was in Corps, you're right, Larry, if you weren't Black and you were white, you were probably Jewish. So there were an extraordinary number of white Jews who were in the movement. And I think it's for the reason you said, the feeling of social justice.
And so, Susan, following that, I have to ask, because Larry, you talked about it too. Why do you think so many Jews have lost their ways? What happened to the men who believe in social justice and helping, helping fight for justice?
Who are you asking?
Well, both of you could answer it because you were in Corps, so you're just as qualified as Larry, who was in SNCC.
I would say I'm a first-generation American. Both my parents were born in Europe and came to the United States as infants. So my experiences were different. Well, I grew up, like Larry talks about being poor, in a one-bedroom apartment in the South Bronx, if any of you know New York. And all of us slept in the same bedroom, my mother, father, my sister, and I. My daughters could never, ever understand living like that. If you lived in a house with less than 2 bathrooms, they don't get it. But it's a different, which is sort of typical of what has happened in this country. The situation has changed. We're now in 2023. I'm talking about the 50s and 60s when life was very different and economics was very different. Neither one of my parents graduated high school, and I have a doctorate. So you can say that's part of being in the United States. So I think when you talk about Jews who have assimilated and have become more economically comfortable, they've worked their way up the ladder, just as many African Americans have. That's not unusual, too. You have a very large, as you know, Maryland, Black middle class in this country. And I suppose that's part of, living in this society.
I agree with you.
What?
Wilbur, I'll jump in, but thank you, Martha.
I do want to say one other thing. People forget that Jews are a very small percent of this society. It's less than, there are less than 6 million Jews in the United States. So it's a small number, but I think for the small number, they've probably been pretty influential. And up until the 60s, there were restrictions on Jews owning houses and going to universities. So I'm sorry to take over. Larry, I'm sorry.
No, that's
Go
fine.
for it.
May I be heard for just a moment?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll jump in later.
Okay. First generation, second generation American, there are 2 different definitions of generation. One is the first generation crossed the ocean, and the second is the first generation with the children of those who crossed the ocean. And it's important to different people use different ones. It's important to make sure which one we're talking about. The other thing is that keep in mind that there are plenty of people came to America as indentured servants, or they were exported. Rather than be in jail, they were given the choice of going to the colonies, and there were also indentured servants. There were people who came here who were very poor, and what I don't know is how many a rich Englishman has two sons. The first son inherits the property. The question is, how many of the second sons came to America? I don't know the answer to that.
Actually, that's a good question. I do know. I'm from Philadelphia, as I said, and it's in Pennsylvania. And Philadelphia was started by the second son of, I think his name was William Penn, too, the father. To get rid of him, get rid of this whole Quaker bunch, the king gave father charter. Father never came, William Penn did. So might be an example. But getting back to the question of what happened, I agree 100% with what Sandra said. What happened was because this country was set up in many ways to de-emphasize class. Remember, Europe, if you ask the average working person in England, what are you? They would say, we're a worker. That's true today, and it was true in the 1700s. If you ask the average working person in America, what are you? They would probably define themselves mostly not in terms of their class, but in terms of their ethnic group or race. And that was part of the genius of these boys that set this country up. They were just understanding their role of class, and they didn't like it. So what happened between the Jewish and Black communities, and I would recommend the book. Can you see this?
Bring it back. Okay.
Oh.
How Jews became white folks.
Yes, how Jews became white folk. It deals with this question that we're dealing with. And basically, the answer is, in this country, in order to advance, you had to become white. So Jews did have that option. And they went through a lot of changes because they came over thinking of themselves as Jews, not white or anything else. But they did advance. And so now we're at the, fourth, fifth generation Jews who were able to advance. And a disproportionate number of Jews are now affluent. And a disproportionate number of Blacks are still poor. And so the common interests between them seems to be less. But there is another phenomenon happening. And there's a couple pieces to it. Holly, why don't you? Holly?
Yeah. I just want to say how strange the world is. I just want to start with that point. I'm sitting next to someone whose father was a Methodist minister. But my first husband, I would say my late great husband, but he would have said of blessed memory, okay, who died in 1997, called out Jews for being anti-Semitic. And the response was, I can't be anti-Semitic. I'm Jewish. And he said, what you said was anti-Semitic. And how courageous could that be, So I just want to, yeah.
That's very true.
And so my original question was there anti-Semitism in the founding fathers expressed?
Yes.
Yes.
The Jews were restricted from most of the colonies.
Uh-huh.
There's a couple that they were not. Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, there was a big deal.
Right.
But mostly Jews could not come over.
Wow.
I started to look up one Jewish guy that I think helped finance the revolution. But, you know, the other thing is that makes things more complicated is the question, are Jews a religious group, an ethnic group, a race? And I studied this, and the answer is clear. It depends. It depends on history. After 1,000 years in Eastern Europe of being separated, Jews became an ethnic group, you know, in the DNA. And my grandparents were all atheists, but they were Jews, and they didn't see the difference. They were Jews, they don't believe in God.
Yeah.
Judaism is the religion of Jews, but not to be Jewish, you don't have to believe in Judaism. On the other hand, highly assimilated countries like Germany and later on in Western Europe, Jews were more or less a religion. You know, they chose to be a religion. Southern Jews in this country, if you ask them by and large, what are you? They would say American. What's your religion? Jewish. When I was growing up, by and large, if you ask Jews in my communities, you know, what are you? They would say Jewish. I don't even understand the question you're asking. We're Jewish. Well, is that a religion or an ethnic? They wouldn't even understand the question. They were simply Jewish. And they would have to think, do they believe in God or not? You know, because most Jews that don't believe in religion go to synagogue, not most, but many, for the tradition. Feels nice. Not to necessarily believe what's being said. In fact, they don't even understand most of what's being said. It's a Hebrew. But you're sitting there. But anyway, the point that I was trying to make is, despite the separation now of class between the African American and Jewish communities, as part of the inheritance of that Jewish roots movement that I spoke about that started in the 60s, it's part of the antagonism of many Jews toward what they see happening to Palestinians in Israel. And part of many Jews' reaction to the rising anti-Semitism in this country. A lot of Jews are understanding that to maintain the progress of this country that they have benefited from, we must rebuild the strong alliance between blacks and Jews. And that's, you know, in communities. We're just talking about folks now. I'm not even talking about organization. And that's happening too. And there are a lot of organizations building bridges, building understanding, and this group itself. This is a very common phenomenon, and it's growing. And I'm very optimistic. Jews are going back to their history, their cultural and religious history, where Dakota One is a very important part of it. And they are also being forced, in the face of Trumpism and QAnon and all of that, to reevaluate, you know, is progress for Jews inevitable in this country with that alliance?
And I'm really glad about what has been going on as well, because I think that we have moved too far from the progress that were being made when we were working together. So I'm hoping that we continue going in that direction and continue to work together, because I think only working together as a group can we accomplish what the goals that we want to accomplish. Just like you said, it was hard for your parents to see the progress that they had helped make, well, go down the drain, and that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing so much progress that had been made is being taken back. And Will, you had a question?
For whatever it's worth, I have been trying to persuade my friends in the Asian community that they would not be as well off as they are if a number of Black people had fought and died.
Yeah, and I think part of it is the education that you get in this country in terms of, well, which is why so many people are upset that we want to teach a history that is more in line with historic facts as opposed to the history that was being taught to us in school.
Yes.
And so they're upset because they think that other people will not hold them in the high regards that they are now held. So that's really upsetting. But does anybody have any last statements that they would like to make? Mr. Rubin, we'll give you the floor. Oh, okay. Sorry, Holly, we will go to you and then we'll give Mr. Rubin.
Okay, I just had this thought this very week, that if we had a new founding fathers and founding mothers to correct the the path that we were set on by the founding fathers, forgetting the founding mothers, wouldn't we not benefit from that? That's all.
And with that, I do want to say that we have made progress because look at what happened yesterday in terms of the distinguished gentleman, Mr. Jeffries, becoming the first African American member who is. Oh my gosh! What is his title?
Leading Minority Speaker of the House.
Thank you, Minority Speaker of the House. And also, it's kind of interesting because the the Republicans actually nominated a Black person as well. He only got 20 votes, but at least they're moving down the line. So, okay, next person, go ahead.
I want to say something.
Yes, go ahead, Zanita.
I think you can trace a lot of the anti-Semitism and the anti-Blackness or anti-minority back to the Roman Empire. If you go back 2,000 years or more, you can see where the roots were. When Hitler started his rhetoric, he was being hired to spy on the anti-Semites. And then he sat and listened so much that he got caught up in it. But he said that the Germans have had this hatred for the Jews for over 1,000 years at this point. But you can directly trace it back. So it goes back. Its roots are deep, and it's sad, and it's tragic, and that the fact that people are voting for that without realizing that that's what they're voting for.
Yes, Sam. Thank you, Zanita. That was a very good point.